Okay students, in this lecture we will look into D block and F block elements. I have made this lecture with the bare minimum of the knowledge that you are expected to know for D block and F block. There is a lot of theory in NCERT, but most of them don't come as questions. So I have tried to distill down the ones that are most important, and also I am going to be teaching in a way that is easy for you to remember based on periodicity. Okay. Now here I have a picture of the periodic table itself. So when you look at the periodic table, we have already seen this in periodicity. These two are called S block. These are D block. This is P block and this is F block. There is a total of 2 groups in S block, 10 in D block, 6 in P block, 14 in F block. Although here it is given 15. Lanthanum and actinum strictly belong here. Okay, here these two are supposed to be the last elements, just put here just for continuity of the atomic numbers. But La and Ac belong to D block, but they actually have no F electron in the outermost F shell. But they are put here because their properties are very similar to the other elements. So you are going to be studying along with them. Now looking at just D block right now, you can see that there are 4 periods. Now let's take it slow. The first D block period is called 3D, this is 4D, this is 5D and this is 6D. As we can see, 6D is incomplete still, and similarly this would be 4F, 5F. Because these start with La, they are called lanthanoids. This start with actinum, these are called actinoids. When you look at D block, the most important chemistry for you guys is that of 3D elements. When you look at D block, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are 10 D block groups, okay? Group 3B to 12B. But when you say transition elements, zinc group is considered not a transition elements. Okay? Strictly speaking, according to IUPAC, transition elements and also inner transition means within transition, these are something where the metal or a metal cation has incomplete d orbital, okay, but not empty. So when you take zinc, for example, zinc by itself is complete D10, right? And zinc 2 plus the cation is also D10. So it's not a transition element by definition, but it is studied along with the other elements because of the similarity in properties. It does belong to D block. Why do we call something as a D block? Okay, that is not because of the electron that you are going to remove. This clarification I want to bring it up front. All of these have Ns, N-1D. In case of F block, you are going to have Ns, N-2 F orbital and N-1 D orbital. Okay. These are called D block because the last electron that enters into the element is in the D orbital. Okay. That does not mean that is the electron that is taken out first. Valence electron is completely different. That's because of poor shielding of D, you lose the S orbital electrons first. So the valence electron in D orbital is S electrons, but the last electron that enters, okay, is in a D orbital. The correct name for that is differentiating electron. It differentiates from other blocks. So the differentiating electron or the last electron enters the D orbital. A differentiating electron for a F block enters the F orbital. As simple as that. Okay. Now when you look at here, they transition from hard metal properties into metalloid properties. Okay. And within them they have group trends. The couple of important groups that you want to know are nickel group or hydrogenation catalyst, copper group is coinage metals, and these are called noble metals because they don't react very well. Zinc group is volatile, they are all evaporate very fast. Okay. Now here I have a couple of things that I want you guys to know. Okay, let's put it. So these are a couple of data that you want to know. Osmium is right here. That's the densest element among all. The second densest element is mercury. Okay, they will be very heavy to lift for a given volume. Oxygen also has the highest oxidation number. Oxygen has +8 oxidation number. The next highest would be manganese +7, chromium +6. Tungsten right here has the highest melting point. Because of that, we use it in our incandescent light bulbs, not anymore though. And zinc group is volatile. What it means is they can evaporate very well. Okay. Now cadmium, it used to be used for fine jewelry in those days, but because it's volatile and it could be carcinogenic, they replaced it right now. Still the cadmium jewelry, they didn't want to take the name away completely because it's widely in use, so now they call it KDM jewelry just to make the name sound familiar. Okay, KDM, it has no cadmium anymore. Mercury, among all the elements, metals here, among all the metals that you have here, has the lowest melting point. Highest is tungsten, lowest is mercury. It has about a melting point of -33. So even if you keep it in your freezer, mercury is going to be a liquid, not a solid. The other metal that is close to being a liquid at room temperature is gallium. At room temperature, there is only 3 species in the entire periodic table that are liquids. Mercury, 28-29 degrees, gallium and bromine. The remaining ones are either gases or solids. Okay. This is an electronic configuration of the 3D orbital that I have given. I have colored the ones that are important for you to know. Chromium is an exception. It has, instead of going from 3D3 and 4s2, it doesn't go to 4s2, 3D4. Okay, instead it goes to 4s1, 3d5. One electron is actually left here. The reason because of what we saw in our way before quantum number lecture. This 5 lone electron, they have exchange energy, so extra stability. Similarly, our copper. Okay. If you look here, all of them have S2 except these two. So instead of this becoming 1 here, sorry, 2 here and 9 here, copper choose to be 1 and 10 because D10 gives you symmetry and exchange energy. So copper is an exception as well. This chromium has come many times in need, so you want to know. You don't need to remember everything in second transition and third transition, 4D and 5D. I have chosen the ones that you want to remember, the ones that are exception. Molybdenum is simple, 5 and 1 right there. Chromium and then molybdenum, very simple, 5 and 1, very simple. Whereas when you take chromium, molybdenum, tungsten does not have 5 and 1. It has 4 and 2. You want to remember this 5 and 1 exception is chromium and only the period below that, tungsten doesn't fall over that. That's one thing you want to know. Second thing you want to know is palladium. Palladium is a weird structure. It belongs to nickel. Instead of being 8-2, it becomes 10-0. Silver is very simple, just like your copper. And gold is also very simple, just like your copper. Very simple. Okay. But when you look at platinum, it's 9-1. So when you take nickel group, nickel, palladium, platinum, you have, let's put it this way, 2s and 8d electrons. Palladium is 0 and 10. This is going to be 1 and 9. So this is a different type of group. Alright. Okay. Don't need to memorize. Make sure that you go to the first slide you have here, periodic table. Understand from that so you don't have to study it again. Right. As I told you, it is going to be quite a bit of theory in this lecture. I try to keep it to a minimum based on the important points. Some of them will seem like I'm just reading through it, but I'll try to do the best I can not to bore you guys. So transition elements being metallic, they possess high metallic characters. These are the metallic characters that you already know. Okay. They have a lot of d electrons. Okay, so they have rich sea of d electrons, though they have a high metal-metal bond. They the melting points are always highest for chromium group. This is easy to remember. Chromium group, when you go to previous slide, you can see that that has the highest number of lone pair of electrons. Okay, here I have paired electrons, here I have lone pair electrons. 6 electrons are lone electrons. Because it has a lot of lone electrons, it can form really efficient metal-metal bonding. Hence, highest melting point is for chromium group. Enthalpy of atomization is the amount of energy you put to make a solid atom to go into gaseous atom. They have very high enthalpy of atomization, okay, because they have very high bonding. So, solid going to gas or solid going to liquid, liquid going to gas means it's going to be very high boiling point as well. And the maxima is at about the middle, just like chromium. The reason because of lot of single electrons. Second and third series, delta H atomization is much higher than first series, much more metallic. 4D and 5D are more metallic than 3D, so they will have a higher delta H atomization. Okay. Right, this is important. This particular slide, this question comes from this one. Atomic and ionic sizes. Luckily, they are going to follow the same trend pretty much. Okay. When you look at it, I have my 3D plotted here and my 4D and 5D. Okay. So here, when you see the range in which the sizes are, okay, this itself is not very much. They are actually very close. The picture is enhanced that way to show the internal differences, but the size variation within a series is quite small actually. Among that, you want to know iron, cobalt and nickel are almost same in size. Okay. They are almost same in size, with nickel being the lowest for the entire period. Okay. The reason the size decreases is because way back we saw Slater's rule or Z effective in general. Z effective is nothing but Z minus sigma. Z stands for the atomic number. Atomic number keeps increasing, so the Z is the attractive force. It keeps increasing. So Z keeps increasing. From Slater's rule, every electron that enters d orbital gets a value of 1, so it increases as you increase the atomic number. Okay. Sigma is the shielding. So for every d electron, I put Z has to increase and sigma also has to increase, but not correspondingly because d orbitals do not shield very well. They increase as expected in Z. So let's put it this way: Z increases, but sigma increases but not as much. So as a consequence of that, Z effective increases. So as you can see, because of that the size decreases. When you go here, the shielding picks up a little. Okay, so this is because of poor shielding because of d orbital electrons. So if there is poor shielding, the nuclear core can attract the outermost 4s electron very well, and they pull it in. They pull it in so much that the size decreases, but not a lot. It's still quite small compared to normal S block and P block. That's one point. Second thing you want to know, from 3D to 4D, if you see X, you're adding a shell, just like an onion. So the size is increased. Fair enough. But when I go from 5D to 6D, the size is not increasing, actually they are overlapping. That's because this is how you have your configurations: 4S, 3D, 4P, 5S, 4D, 5P. But when I go to my 6S, I don't jump straight to my 5D. I have my 4F and then 5D and then 5P. Similarly, 7S, 5F, 6D, sorry, this is 6, 7P. Okay, so these F orbitals shield extremely poor. If they shield poorly, the size decreases. So the 6D size decreases than expected. So the difference between these two is not as much. Even though I am adding a shell, because of poor shielding of F orbitals, the size is not increasing. F orbital electrons right here belong to lanthanoids. So this is called lanthanide contraction. Okay, and this is a question that you can expect in NEET. Lanthanide contraction brings the size of 4D and 5D very close. Similarly, in terms of actinoids, the 5F orbital shielding is very poor, so you have actinide contraction. Okay, So now what we have seen is a couple of things. One is the sizes decrease because of increasing Z effective, but they don't increase that much. So the sizes are within narrow band, and particularly iron, cobalt and nickel are very close to each other. Okay, that's one thing we saw. Second thing is 3D and 4D is expected size difference. 4D and 5D is because of lanthanide contraction, not a lot of change. So now here is a theory for that due to poor shielding of nuclear charge by 4F. Now the example that keeps coming is usually zirconium and hafnium. Okay, zirconium and hafnium are pretty close. So you can see here hafnium is actually smaller. Okay, it's about 1 picometer smaller than zirconium. It's supposed to be larger because of you're adding a shell, but it's actually smaller because of extremely poor shielding. Because of the similar size and same periods, they have very similar physical and chemical properties. Now, properties of d orbitals, d orbital metals. First is ionization enthalpy. It increases from left to right. It's understandable. Z effective is increasing. Zn has the highest. Okay, that's all. Why Zn has the highest is in all of them you can remove electrons easily, whereas in Zn you have to remove from completely filled one. And see, copper has an incentive to lose the electron. I can become 4s0 and become a stable configuration, fully filled d orbital, fully empty s orbital. Whereas zinc, by losing one electron, it does not get any stability. I want to make a point clear. Usually you are used to thinking fully filled is more stable. Next is half filled. Half filled does not apply to 4s. Half filled is stable because of exchange energy, but 4s has only one box. Correct? 4s is, see, for example, if you take p orbital, this is half filled. This can exchange with this and this can exchange with this. 4s is only one, so it cannot exchange. So 4s is not half filled, so there is no incentive for this. So this is a high ionization energy. Obviously, we also know one more. IE2 is greater than IE1. This is the case, and it's unusually high for chromium and copper. Okay. Chromium used to be S1D5, copper used to be S1D10. Now second ionization energy means already they have become S0D5, they have become S0D10. Now second ionization energy is able to remove one electron from here. This is going to be tough because this is half filled, this is fully filled. So second ionization, first one zinc is high, second copper is high, and chromium is higher than expected. Zinc is correspondingly low second ionization energy. Okay, that's clear because now I have removed one electron. First ionization energy is high, but second is low. So I would love to become zinc 2 plus. Hence zinc actually becomes zinc 2 plus easily because zinc to zinc plus is tough. Zinc plus to zinc 2 plus is easy. Sum of these two is going to be easy. Alright, that's about it for ionization energy that you guys need to know. Next is standard electrode potential. Only a couple of points that you want to know here. When you look at the standard electrode potential graph, you can see one thing. This is drawn to axis to scale, and only copper is positive. So meaning copper is the only element in the 3D orbital, where 3 orbital elements where it is higher than hydrogen. Okay, all the other ones are lower. You need to remember only these two values because they come in echem. Right? Special case of copper, it's going to come in two different places. First one is this. Copper is very high in E0 value, meaning it allows to be copper 0. So it will not easily liberate hydrogen from acids. Whereas when I put zinc in dilute HCl, it will easily liberate. Okay, but zinc in HNO3, it will easily liberate, but copper will not easily do. If I have to do it, I have to use an oxidizing acid like our concentrated HNO3 or concentrated H2SO4. Oxidizing acids are the ones where the atom here is in highest oxidation number. Nitrogen is plus 5, sulfur is plus 6. They are oxidizing and they can oxidize copper. HCl cannot do this because HCl is not an oxidizing acid. Why is copper different? Because copper going to copper 2 plus, okay, the opposite of what we want here. This is reduction potential, opposite of what we want. Okay, if this has to happen, somebody has to stabilize the metal ion. That is basically your hydration energy, putting in water. For all the metals, the hydration energy is very high, so they love to go to the corresponding metal ion. In terms of copper, the ionization energy, the energy I have to spend to make copper go to copper 2 plus, is higher than what I would gain by hydration energy. Okay, so it's basically a competition between the two. Ionization energy is the amount of energy I need to put to make it go here. Hydration energy is the one that is going to stabilize. It doesn't stabilize as much, so copper does not want to be copper 2 plus. It loves to be copper plus. Okay. One other point I want to mention here, if you look at the values, many of them, okay, many of them, if you see here, they are actually not going to liberate your metal when you do electrolysis. When you look at this, iron, cobalt, nickel, so anything from iron can be deposited. Okay, all the other ones here cannot be deposited because when I pass current, your water gets electrolyzed preferentially compared to the metal. Okay, we will see more of this in electrochemistry. When you revise that, you will know. Alright. Okay. Oxidation numbers. What are the common oxidation numbers? I am trying to pull up a graph here. So if you see here, all of them are like a triangle shaped, meaning this is 3D elements. Triangle shape means the one in the center has the highest amount of oxidation numbers, manganese. Here it's ruthenium, here it is osmium. Osmium is +8, lutetium is +8. Okay, the highest ones that is possible, +8. +7 is possible by ruthenium and technetium and manganese. Okay, you just need to know a couple of them. But what you want to know is the oxidation number follows a trend. It keeps increasing. The highest oxidation number keeps increasing till the middle of the group and then falls down. Most of transition metals have multiple oxidation numbers. As we can see, most of them has multiple oxidation numbers. For example, manganese has +2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Now these empty ones mean these are unstable. One thing you want to know, higher oxidation numbers are stabilized by fluorides compared to your bromides and iodides. So when you want to look at your halides, okay, your halide, among halides, fluorides stabilize better higher oxidation numbers than the bromides and chlorides. The reason because something has to stabilize them. The high lattice energy. Lattice energy is based on charge density, right? So this is small anion. So lattice energy is very very high. So it stabilizes it. But even better than fluoride is oxide. For example, if you take Mn, you don't have manganese in +7 oxidation state with fluorine even, but you have it oxygen, K1O4, Mn2O7, all those. Because it stabilizes even better because of the ability to form double bonds. Okay. Whereas with fluorine, it has to form 7 bonds. Whereas this can form double bonds. So geometrically also it is favorable. The lowest oxidation number, 0, is stabilized by pi ligands. Example, we will see this soon, pretty soon in coordination compounds. The lowest is pi ligands. Again, there is a special case of copper because of the same property. High hydration energy of copper is there, copper 2 plus, but it is not enough to easily make copper go to copper 2 plus, but still this is high enough compared to copper plus. Okay. So because of that, even though copper plus is extremely stable, logic should tell you copper compound should mostly be cuprous, not cupric. But most of your compounds that you know, example, if I were to ask you, guess or tell me a compound in copper with copper, the most common answer I would get is copper sulfate. That is 2 plus, not 1 plus. So what gives? See, this is 10. Symmetry is destroyed. So the amount of stability you gain from symmetry is offset by the high hydration energy of copper 2 plus. Because of that, copper is different. Here I have two equations. No need to memorize them. Just look at it this way. Because of the high hydration energy, copper plus disproportionates in a solution to copper 2 plus and copper. Meaning, one molecule of copper oxidizes, one molecule of copper reduces. Disproportionate meaning disproportionately half gets oxidized and half gets reduced. Okay. Another thing that you want to know, among halides, copper 2 plus does not have a iodide. That's because copper 2 plus is oxidizing, I minus is reducing. So if you have CuI2, okay, this will self-oxidize reduce to give you Cu2I2. This has come in neat once. Which among them is not stable? Okay. If a compound has to be stable, the anion and cation should be happy with each other. But the anion is oxidizing, cation is the cation is oxidizing, anion is reducing, means they will react with each other. That's the case for CuI. CuI will end up giving you Cu2I2 and I2. This is only for copper, you want to remember it as an exception. This is important, this has come many times. Magnetic moment, magnetic property. Whenever you have a single electron, d electron, that is going to be paramagnetic, the one in the red, and everything else is going to be diamagnetic. Okay, but you may be asked not just the elements itself, you may be asked about the ions. That has come many times. This is the formula to calculate it, square root of n into n plus 2, where n stands for the number of single electrons. So for example, in this case it will be 1, in this case it will be 2, 3, 5, plus 1, 6, 5 here. Here you don't go for 6 because you have to go for the corresponding box diagram. Okay, and it's calculating Bohr magnetron. Now this comes down to very simple. If number of electrons is 1, square root of 1 into 1 plus 2, it will come to 1 point something. N equals 2 means mu equals 2 point something. 3 equals 3 point something. Here's an explanation. So now for anything that has above manganese, you want to draw the diagram to know whether they are paired or unpaired. Okay. So number of electrons is 4, answer is 4 point something. 5, 5 point something, 2, 2 point something, 3, 3. This is just a coincidence. That's how math works. Okay. So this comes many times, but I cannot stress it enough. You need to know the question is asked from D block elements or is it asked from coordination compounds. In D block elements, they'll give you the ion straight away, whereas in coordination compounds, these could be paired. For example, if I take chromium, I can pair this electron if I have a strong ligand. So you need to know what chapter the question is being asked from. If you see a ligand, you will know it is coordination compounds. Just the ion, it is D block. Couple of properties of D block. These are important for you guys. They do have colored ions because of the lone electrons. And also the ion depends on the ligand that you have. For example, copper chloride will have a different color compared to copper fluoride. Okay. And these three is going to be colorless because when you write the electronic configuration, you will see that they don't have any single d electrons. This is D0, D10, sorry, this is D10, D0, D0. So no DD transition. Right? So it won't give you any color. Now, one thing that you want to know here, when you look at colored electron, that is because of DD transition. Okay, this happens because of electrons from one d orbital jumps to another d orbital. But when you take a case of KMnO4 and K2Cr2O7, these are plus 7 plus 6, meaning D0, D0, but they are colored. Okay. This is because of, this is new for you guys. You want to remember the name, charge transfer from oxygen atoms, from oxygen. Charge transfer from oxygen atoms can give you color. There are three ways you can get color. One is DD transition, one is charge transfer. Okay. The third one is HOMO-LUMO transfer. HOMO-LUMO transfer is MO theory. Right, let's not confuse it over here. At least these two elements you need to know it is because of charge transfer. Formation of complex compounds, you are going to see a separate lecture on that. Why do they form it? Because the small size of the metal ions. Small size means they can attract the ligand electrons very well. Okay. It would logically say that the larger the ion, I can put more ligand around me. But the larger it is hard for the nucleus to attract the electrons. So you want a smaller size. High ionic charges, they have up to +8, right? So they can attract. These are behaving as Lewis acids. Okay, charge is high means they want electrons, they behave as Lewis acid. Available to d orbitals to get the electrons from ligand and put it in their orbitals. The next property is alloy formation. Metal and metal can form homogeneous solid solutions. We saw in surface chemistry solutions, that's the first one, the dispersed phase and the dispersed medium, both of them are solids. Alloy can form when The metals that are forming alloys have an atomic radii difference of about 15% maximum. This is coming down to solid state. Imagine solid state, you take one metal and put another metal in there. Okay, impurity defect, right? But if I want to put, I'm restricted by the size of the metal atoms. I cannot put too large of a metal. I cannot take sodium and put a huge rubidium in there because there is not enough space. At the same time, I cannot put really small element because it won't be able to bond with the neighboring element. Okay, so you want the difference to be very small. Example, stainless steel is an example that you want to know. It is iron which has about 11% chromium. So basically look at where they are situated. Chromium, manganese, iron. So very close. So they are close in size. There are a few more examples I have given. You are expected to remember them. These are the examples that will come in need. The next one is a really good property is formation of interstitial compounds. Interstitial compounds are basically your interstitial defects where hydrogen, carbon and nitrogen very small, they get trapped inside the crystal lattice of metals. So imagine metal forming a FCC lattice and the tetrahedral void or those places, these can get trapped. This is non-stoichiometric, so you don't know how much is getting trapped. This is neither going to be ionic nor going to be covalent, it is going to be right in between. And the properties, because this happens, is you end up with a higher melting point than the starting element. They are extremely hard, particularly for example, some of the compounds of boron are as hard as your diamond. Some boron nitrides are as good as diamond in terms of hardness. Metallic conductivity is very high and they are chemically inert. The last property we want to know is catalytic property. They have multiple oxidation numbers or oxidation states, so because of that they can easily form temporary bonding with the incoming reactant, convert them into product, and they have the ability to form complexes with the reactant as well, converting into the product of choice that you want. Okay. Couple of oxides and the structures are important for need. These are what's in your syllabus. Okay. Oxides and oxoanions. In general, this property that you want to remember, oxidation number of a metal is proportional to the covalent character. This is very simple. Okay. Covalent character is tendency to attract electrons to from somebody else, okay, to share it. A normal metal would have given electrons, so when M goes to M plus, okay, it is given one electron. Now if M goes to M2 plus, it is given one more electron. So if the oxidation number increases, this becomes greedy, okay, it wants electrons. So oxidation number of a metal is proportional, means the higher it gets, it wants the electrons back, but it cannot take the electron back, so it would like to share it. So anytime you have a higher oxidation number metal, it's going to be more covalent than a lower oxidation metal. How this can be asked is, for example, M12O3 is more ionic than M12O5, which is more ionic than M12O7, which is opposite of saying this is ionic, this is covalent. Same goes for acidic character. Acidic character is the same. Imagine you losing electrons. You are losing electron means you want electrons back. Wanting electron is Lewis acid. Okay, you can extrapolate that to acidic character. That acidic character, for example, Mn is Mn7 plus here. It's when you do hydrolysis, you can actually see HMnO4. Permanganic acid can be formed. Okay, permanganic. Per means usually lot more oxygens. Couple of things that you want to know. Mn2O7 is acidic. No need to memorize this equation. It's acidic plus 7. You put in water, you get MnO4 minus. Alright. Now you want to remember that it has Mn-O-Mn bond. There is no metal-metal bond. There is only Mn-O-Mn bond. And there are two types of metal-oxygen bond. There is this bond and there is this bond. Obviously, this is longer than this one. Correct? Because this is a single bond, this is a double bond. Okay. This MnO4 minus can actually give you, this is this Mn2O7 as well. Okay. How are these two related? Now, when you erase this, what I have, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take one more molecule, HMnO4, I get H2Mn2O8, I'm going to subtract the water, I get this. Okay. So basically Mn2O7 is an anhydride of this HMnO4. Okay. Same thing you have here. This is chromic trioxide. Okay. Chromic trioxide. This is +6 oxidation state. When you hydrolyze it, you get H2CrO4 or H2Cr. See 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cr7. Sorry, Cr2O7. Again, this is simple. H2CrO4. Add one more molecule. So to this is CrO3. I add water. I get H2CrO4. So that's the corresponding chromic acid. Take chromic acid, add 2 times, you get H4Cr2O8. You subtract water from that, you get H2Cr2O7. So what it means is, this is the anhydride. Okay, this is the anhydride. Okay. Anytime you are given a compound, you don't need to memorize these formulas. Anytime you are given a compound, something like this, always add water and divide by 2. Okay. Just add water and divide by 2, you will get this compound. Or the other way around, you have this compound, add 2 and subtract the water. Okay. So again, what we have seen right now is, the higher the oxidation number, the more acidic it is. And also vanadium, you have 3 different oxides in your syllabus. It's extremely simple. The oxidation number of vanadium here is +3, +5, sorry, +4, +5. As the oxidation number increases, you can say acidic character increases. Doesn't mean it becomes an acid. What used to be a base became less basic, and even less basic, that it is partly acidic and partly basic, which is amphoteric. Right. Now a couple of structures which is in your syllabus you have to remember. Okay, this is, if you look at it, it looks like CrO5. It has a butterfly structure. Okay, if you just look at the atoms, you will get a +10 oxidation number. When you look at bonding, we have already seen this +6 oxidation number. This is chromic peroxide. When you react K2Cr2O7 with peroxide, you will get this. See, there is peroxide, 2 peroxide linkage. Looks like a butterfly, so this is called a butterfly structure. So this is CrO5. The other thing is Cr2O3. Okay, this has a chromium oxygen chromium bond, just like this one. Right. Now, unfortunately, you are expected to know these reactions. Okay, but they rarely come in need, so it is a good thing. Potassium dichromate. This is used in leather industry, but they are phasing it out because chromium +6 is a carcinogen. There is an English movie called Erin Brockovich. It's actually based on true story about how chromium 6+ was causing cancer, and the government reacted to it. In India, for example, close to you guys, actually, in Chennai, if you see Chrompet, there used to be a big leather factory, and the area is called Chrompet because chromium is used to be used rather large amount. Okay, and the tanneries used to pollute the atmosphere. Now, synthesis of chromic K2Cr2O7, no need to worry about balancing, just focus on this. Just go from Cr2O4 giving you Cr2O7. That's the synthesis. Cr2O4 gives you Cr2O7. Okay. Now there are 2 Cr2O4s giving you 2 different ones. Ferrous Cr2O4 with sodium converts to sodium Cr2O7 because sodium compounds are more reactive than iron compounds. So I converted it to sodium. Okay. This is just displacement reaction. I took iron, I put sodium. Now I put in acidic medium. Okay, this becomes sodium dichromate. I convert cation exchange, potassium dichromate. Okay, rather straightforward. Here you need to know the chromate ion and dichromate ion structures. If you look at the chromate ion, you have CrO4 2- because it's an ion. It is in a residing structure, so all the bond angles are same and all the bond lengths are same. You have you have CrO4 2 minus plus 6. So you're going to have Cr double bond O, single bond O minus single bond. This is one of the resonating structures. But this is the correct structure. This is the most stable resonating structure. But what you can see here is there is 6 bonds shared in 4 different places. So each of the bond is a bond order of 1.5. Okay. And it's a perfectly tetrahedral. So 109.28 is the bond angle. This chromate and dichromate are interconvertible depending on the pH of the system. In acidic medium, you end up forming a dichromate. A dichromate in basic medium gives you the chromate ion. Okay. So in dichromate, if you see just like the previous slide for manganese, you have CrO-Cr bond. Okay. Just 2 of them are joining. Okay. Now if you see this and this, you have to lose the oxygen. Okay. It combines with the hydrogen and becomes water. You lose the oxygen. When you go from here to here, I need an oxygen, so I use OH minus. Here I have 2 different bonds because one is a single bond, one is 1.5 bond order. Okay, they are different, so this is a rather shorter bond than this one. No need to worry about bond angles, just know that this is close to tetrahedral. When it comes to dichromate, this is what is extremely important to you guys. The reactions of dichromate and the acidic reaction, be it alkaline, it will also be the same change in oxidation numbers. Dichromate gives you Cr3 plus. This is the only thing that you want to remember. Dichromate gives you Cr3 plus. Okay, because there is 2 chromium and dichromate, this is a 6 electron process. Okay, this is plus 6 oxidation number goes to plus 3. So this is 6 electron. This is what you want to remember. And dichromate is a rather strong oxidizing agent, so it is going to oxidize I minus to I2, H2S to sulfur. So I put the oxidation numbers. Tin plus 2 plus can only get oxidized to tin 4 plus. Iron 2 plus can only get oxidized to iron 3 plus. So you don't have to worry about this. Whereas when you look at here, I minus goes to I2, it doesn't go to I plus. Okay. Sulfide goes to sulfur. So now it's a 6 electron process. So I have shown you equations where there is also 6 electrons, so you can actually bring up any equation. This can come in your mole concept question and equivalent weight question. So you have to be able to do, particularly this equation you have to remember. And from redox actually you can balance it. Okay, 2 chromium, I put 2 chromium. Okay, 7 oxygen, so 7 water, 14 hydrogen, count the charges, you'll get 6 electrons. Alright. Next is KMnO4. Just as important as K2Cl2O7 is KMnO4. This is a synthesis that's rather short, but you want to remember this species, the first one. This is manganate, this is permanganate. Okay. The first step converts MnO2, manganese dioxide, into manganate. This is plus 4, gets oxidized to plus, when you calculate here, plus 6, which gets oxidized to plus 7. Okay. The manganate is dark green, permanganate is dark purple. Permanganate is extremely good oxidizing agent. You can use it as an antiseptic and also as a diluted solution for mouthwash and washing wounds if you don't have any other antiseptic available. Both of these, okay, they will interconvert depending on pH. H plus will convert it to KMnO4, OH minus will convert to manganate. They have the same shape, more or less. The bond angles are different, of course, because they are not the same species. This is all the oxygens are if you see all the oxygens are different. So these 3 are same, this is different. Here these 2 are same, these 2 are different. So single bonds will be different. But when you take this as an ion, okay, will it exist like this? Not, obviously not. All of them will be partial bond order. So this bond and this bond will be shown as dot dot dot, just like previous slide. Okay, so they will end up becoming a same bond order. So particularly KMnO4 is something that you want to know. I'll do it for you guys. KMnO4 is MnO4 minus Mn double bond O, double bond O, double bond O, single bond O. 7 bonds are there, so this is 7 plus. Now you see that 2, 4, 6, 7. 7 bonds in 4 different places. So this is the bond order of the permanganate ion. Okay. permanganate ion is going to have a bond order of 7 by 4 and the bond angle close to 109.28 because these are one of the resonating structures. The actual resonating structures would be dot 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 everywhere. Okay. Now it's a very good oxidizing agent, just like your K2Cl2O7. It can oxidize others. When you look at it, it can get converted to Mn2 plus. This is again an important reaction that you want to remember. K2Cl2O7 gets converted to Cr3 plus. MnO4 gets converted to Mn2 plus. It's a 5 electron process in acidic condition. I cannot use a HCl for this reaction because HCl Cl minus can get oxidized by MnO4. So imagine that I want to oxidize MnO4 minus, I want to oxidize Fe2 plus. Okay, you want to figure out how much Fe2 plus is there. So I react with MnO4. I don't want MnO4 minus to react with anybody else but only Fe2 plus. That's when I can figure out how much is used up. What if the acid itself is using it, HCl? Then my analysis would be wrong. So HCl cannot be used for this purpose. This H plus right here, you can write it down if you want. This has to be an oxidizing acid like HNO3, H2SO4. HNO3 is already oxidized. MnO4 cannot oxidize it. H2SO4 is already oxidized. MnO4 cannot oxidize it. Okay. These 6 equations that you have to remember, basically getting converted to the corresponding oxidized state. MnO4 minus gets reduced to Mn2 plus. Oxidate gets oxidized to CO2. Yes, this is rather something I really want to say here. If you see 4 oxygen, this is 8 minus. Okay, 2 minus is accounted for, so minus 6 is compensated by plus 6, so each carbon is plus 3. Okay, so there is 2 carbons. Carbon is, each carbon is plus 4, so 2 carbons is plus 8 plus 6, so this is a 2 electron process. Okay, so this comes many times. MnO4 is to C2O4 2 minus. This is 5 electron process, this is 2 electron process. So I have to take 2 MnO4 minus for every 5 oxalate. So they will react in the ratio 2:5. This is the stoichiometric ratio. Okay, or they will react in the ratio 1:5 by 2 or 2 by 5:1. Okay, just dividing whatever you want. This is easy because if I have know the moles of MnO4 minus, multiply by 5 by 2 to get the moles of oxalate. If I know the moles of oxalate, multiply by 2 by 5 to get the moles of MnO4 minus. Fair enough? Alright. So this is an acidic solution. K2Cl2O7 is a lot easy. Acidic or alkaline, it's the same reaction, Cr3 plus formation. Whereas when it comes to MnO4, in alkaline and neutral solutions, it forms MnO4, MnO2. So this is 4 plus. So it's a 3 electron process. So acidic solution 5 electron, basic or neutral solution 3 electron. And there are a couple of reactions that it can do, and you want to remember. Okay, you cannot oxidize this completely to IO4 minus. Okay, the reason because IO4 minus is much stronger oxidizing agent. It will oxidize the MnO2 to MnO4 minus. So IO4 minus is not formed, IO3 minus is formed. Try not to memorize it, you might forget it. So know it as oxidizing reducing agent, it might be easier for you. Look at sulfur for example. What is the highest oxidation number it can go is plus 6, and that's the species I know for sulfur. Nitrogen highest oxidation number plus 5, that's all I know. Iron highest oxidation number plus 3. Carbon is plus 4. This is the best way you can remember. Alright. Okay, finally the last slide. The inner transition elements, F block. I keep it to a minimum based on the type of question that is being asked before. So this comprises of 2 periods. The first period is lanthanoids. This comprises 14 elements following the element lanthanum. Lanthanum is a D block element, but it is studied along with the F blocks because of the similarity in property. Okay, lanthanum as such has right here, if you see, no F element, F electrons. So this is not a F block element, it is studied with F block. Okay. Now you don't need to know all the electronic configuration. Electronic configurations are pretty straightforward. They will have the same like 6s2, 4f, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you keep filling. The only exceptions are right here. And this will be self-explanatory. Okay. So lanthanum doesn't belong here, it's a D block, so it's straightforward. When it comes to cerium, okay, when it comes to cerium, if you see all of them are 5D1, that makes sense. The reason? So you start with your 6s, then it's a lanthanum which is 5D1, then you go to the bottom, right, 2 rows. So you start with your 4 of filling, 1 through 14. So I filled 1, that's good. So now if you see gadolinium, you see that I have 7 and only 1 here. Okay, it's supposed to be 8 here and 0 here, but I have 7 and 1 because I get half filled. Okay, this is exceptionally stable. Cerium is an exception. So all of them, if you see, we have already seen this before. Ns, N minus 2F, N minus 1D. So I should have 6s, then 4 of being filled, not 5D except these 4 elements. Okay, cerium is an extremely important element in terms of volumetric analysis. Cerium 4 going to cerium 2 or the other way around is slow, so kinetics is very good to actually use for titration. You want to remember gadolinium, instead of 6s2 4 of 8, it will push 1 electron to D, so it can be half filled. Similarly, lutetium, the last element, fully filled. You want to remember this. Their size, if you look at it, they're fairly regularly decreasing. So basically they follow a pattern decreasing. So D block you saw something like a U at the tail. Here it is going to fairly decrease. But the decrease is less than expected because of lanthanide contraction. Okay, F orbitals don't shield very well, so every electron that you put, okay, it doesn't become bigger, it actually is smaller. Electronic configuration is given, that's okay. Diamagnetic ions. When it comes to ions, anything that is F0 and F14 will be diamagnetic. Straightforward, F0 means no F electron, F14 means all of them are paired. Anything in between is going to be paramagnetic. These are the ones that are going to be diamagnetic. Don't memorize them, just look at the order of these elements, you will be alright. They are used for a couple of things. They can be used for plates as well, to make plates, but the most important one that you want to do is mischmetal alloy. 95% of some of the lanthanoid elements with 5% iron is extremely useful. That's the major use of lanthanoids. Now I kept to bare minimum of lanthanoids based on the question that has been asked. Similarly, actinoids I kept it to even simpler. There are 14 elements following actinium, and the size is going to be contracting just like your lanthanoids. There we called it lanthanide contraction. Here it is actinoid contraction or actinide contraction. They have a range of oxidation numbers. When it comes to lanthanoids, the most common oxidation number that most of them have is +3 right here. Only cerium doesn't form +3, it forms +2, +3 and +4, but all of them form +3 and they don't exhibit much other oxidation states. Whereas in actinoids they exhibit a lot of oxidation state because all these orbital energy levels are much close, so it's easy to remove. Okay? Thorium is the only one that is different in your electronic configuration, hence I put it here. So when you see thorium here, okay, thorium as it is 6d2 5f0. So when you remove electrons, basically you keep removing electrons like usual, but in this case after I remove 3 electrons, there is 4 here, when I remove 3, the single electron now migrates to F orbital. Okay, this is because of energy. So thorium alone you want to remember. And there is a picture of India. The reason it is there is because India has the largest amount of thorium in the world. More than 1/6 of the thorium in the world is actually in India. And why is that important? Is thorium is one of the elements that can be fuel for the future. Okay, much more safer than working with uranium for nuclear fuel. Easier to dispose of, and it has probably around supply for 400 to 500 years of energy, except that existing nuclear reactors, okay, that setup cannot be used for thorium. That's designed for uranium. It cannot be done. If it is done, the entire energy crisis will be over. Right, students? So now what we have seen is D block elements and some F block elements. I kept it to a minimum again. Crash course students and students who are revising at this time, this is all you can study right now. But if you are a year-long student, or if you are a 11th standard or 12th standard student studying along with your syllabus, make sure you go through the NCERT line by line as well. Okay, don't try to memorize it. Try to see how much you can remember based on just habit. Okay, that's the best way to do. Try to do it. If at all they ask a question from this chapter, it will come only from NCERT. Alright, good luck guys. Thank you.